I would say the biggest factor for me is my team and my people.
Just a quick reminder for you to like, subscribe, and rate this podcast so we can get your feedback and know how to make it better.
Hey, it's Ari. Welcome to another episode of the Made in America podcast. Today, I'm with Laura Grondin, CEO of Virginia Industries. Laura, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you, Ari.
It's my pleasure. It's Made in America podcast, Laura. So we start off with the same two questions. What do you make and why do you make it?
Okay, so Virginia Industries makes a variety of products that go into things that people use every day and they don't really realize it. And the why of that is because in order to be successful in manufacturing, you have to have a purpose. And our purpose is to find those products that people need.
And make them successfully.
And make them successfully.
There you go. So Virginia Industry is really interesting, Laura, different from I think a lot of the conversations that we've been so privileged to have on the podcast, is a company that owns multiple companies.
Correct.
So maybe kind of walk me through what are the companies that are owned by Virginia Industries today?
Right. So the first one, so just to back up maybe slightly, okay. In the late 1950s, two men got together and bought these two businesses. One was Bingham and Taylor, started in 1849 in Buffalo, New York. Today we have three operations in Virginia. They make meter and valve boxes for gas and water utilities. So when you walk down the street, and you can see them right here in Hartford, and you see caps in the street, anything smaller than a manhole cover, and it says Bingham and Taylor or BNT, it's definitely ours. If it says Gardner box, it's ours. If it says water, it could be ours, but it might not be.
Yeah.
Or gas, both. You'll see both in this local area.
And the purpose of that is to be able for them to service items?
To be able to get access to a meter or valve that's under the ground, that's helping to either meter or valve the water or the gas.
Like natural gas we're talking about?
Compressed natural gas, yes.
Got it. Wow. Very cool.
Thank
you. That's one of the businesses?
Yes. The other one, Hartford Technologies, started as Hartford Steel Ball in 1926 in West Hartford, Connecticut. Now was moved in the 1960s to our current location in Rocky Hill, Connecticut. And they make primarily small steel balls.
Like ball bearing type?
So ball bearings. Could be a ball, could be a bearing, could be both. It's kind of a confusing terminology.
Got it.
But it's basically an anti-friction device that allows something to rotate or to move.
Got it.
Or to, I didn't mention this earlier, but we make balls that go into chicken drinkers. So when the little chicken goes up and he pushes the little thing, there's a ball in there that regulates the amount of water that comes out for the chicken to drink.
Yes, my daughter has two guinea pigs, and I believe there's a ball in that little water thing.
Yeah.
And when they're going to drink the water, I can hear it tick, 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 because they've got to push it in to get the little bit of water out.
Yes.
Yes. These balls are everywhere.
They're everywhere. They're in your steering column of your car.
Yeah, which kind of goes back to this idea of making things every day that people need, but may not even realize it's in their everyday life.
You said that better than I did at the beginning. Thank you.
Well, I'm supposed to do that, I guess. And so there was just, when these two men got together to do it, any particular rhyme or reason, or they just thought this would be an interesting adventure?
I don't know. I think the only commonality at the time is that businesses were primarily engaged in metalworking, but very different type of metalworking, but that was the one common theme.
So we've got these like two businesses that have the unique, or not unique, but have the same pattern of making things everybody needs, but is not very well known.
Yes.
But that doesn't really tell us like kind of how you got involved. Clearly, you were not around in 1926, and for sure not around in 1849. No. So how did Laura get into the story? So
my father came to work for the business in 1974. Most of his career he was a financial, his financial acumen is incredible. That was kind of his passion and background. In 1982, there was one remaining owner of the original two, and they helped him purchase the business. was a freshman in college at the time, so I didn't really grow up with that. This is part of my DNA. But when I got out of college, I had studied architecture, and I got offered a job as a draftsperson in an architecture firm, and my dad offered me a job doing what you would now call IT. In his was data processing, in his manufacturing business, and I thought that learning about computers would give me more options as I went down the road. So I took his job.
You decided, hey, I'll go after an IT job, and look where things ended up.
Essentially, and I know that's your business, so there's always a little bit of irony in life.
Well, full circle, I guess,
Yes.
Laura, full circle.
Yes.
So how does an IT job turn into CEO of a industrial conglomerate, as it were?
Slowly, but surely. My father cycled me through a lot of the financial area. I held a financial position, an IT position. I wrote a payroll system. I wrote an inventory control system for the company. He put me as the head of what you would now call HR. It was called industrial relations at the time. And then I ran what was the Hartford Bearing Company in the late 90s. And in 1999, while I was pregnant with my second child, my father decided it was time for him to retire, and he made me the CEO.
While you were right in the middle of the pregnancy.
Yes, I was
going with the theme
I
of
was
go ahead.
6 or 7 months pregnant when I stood up in front of the company and said, "Hi, I'm your new CEO."
And I'll probably be on maternity leave. No such thing.
No such thing.
Yeah.
Actually, with my second child, I took 2 full weeks off.
Wow, a
And
whole
I
full 2
stayed
weeks.
home for an entire month and worked from home for 2 weeks, which in 1999 was not that popular.
No.
It's not. I mean, today you say that and people are like, "Yes, so."
Right. Yeah. Back then, it was a whole different
different thing.
ballgame.
Yes.
I guess your father really believed in the idea: if you need something done by someone who can get stuff done, find someone who's really busy and ask them to do it.
I guess.
Yeah.
He later said to me, I thought it would be better to do it then than after the child was born. Only a man could say so. Sorry.
Yes. Fair enough. Fair enough. If you haven't walked a mile in those shoes, hard to know.
Yeah.
So
it's okay.
did you know much about the Virginia business, the Bingham and Taylor business when you got appointed to be CEO? Sounds like you had been pretty engrossed in the Connecticut
I had
business.
only had one role, which was the head of HR, which I held for about 3 years, where I interacted with the Southern Bingham and Taylor. So not as much as I might know about what had gone on in Connecticut during those some odd years, 13 years.
When you came in to kind of find out where the company was at the time, what was sort of the status of things? I mean, the 90s was a notoriously challenging time. Late 80s into the 90s, even into the early 2000s, was a challenging time for manufacturing in the United States. And I would say particularly so.
Yeah.
For more, I don't know if this is the right phrase, so don't take offense, but more of the sort of old line manufacturing,
I don't take offense at that term because that is in fact what it is. And the truth is that if you can't find a way to modernize your business, even today in some way or another, you will cease to exist. And it almost doesn't matter what type of business you have. You have to reinvent yourself every so often. Mm-hmm. So back in 1999, going into 2000, we owned 2 foundries. I went on a tour of foundries, and I quickly learned that we were not going to be able to modernize 2 foundries. And you think about air quality, water quality, there's a lot that goes into operating a foundry. So I shut one of them down. At the same time, up in Connecticut, we had been making steel balls, and you can see there's a multitude of processes that take you from the beginning to the end of making a ball. And we had really gotten to the point where balls were coming in complete for what we could buy material for. That's a game.
You could buy a finished
ball coming out of Asia, much typically for what we could buy the wire for. It's a game over.
Yeah, that is game over.
Game over.
Yeah.
Now, we also had branched into bearing making, and some of that evolved and over time. But the root of the business was the balls, and we had to move our production to China.
So 80 years post the founding, roughly, of the business.
Yes.
The jig was up.
Yes, jig was up.
What was that sort of decision like? And at the time, difficult, easy?
I would say the first 5 or 6 years that I was running that business, it was very difficult. And the worst part about shutting down a plant, moving production, is the impact that it has on the people. Now, in the case of Hartford, the balls, we were able to offer early retirement. We worked with the state for retraining. We were able to do some things to try to protect the people that were impacted and to give them choice about their future. When we shut down the foundry in Alabama, it was just not a good experience. Yeah,
give me a sort of compare and contrast the difference.
Well,
'cause it's emotionally difficult to probably make those decisions in your role, no matter where it is.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't say this in TV, but it's when I learned how to drink a vodka martini. Anyway, couldn't say that.
That's enough.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, the difference is that in the case of the foundry in Alabama, we had the two foundries. Most of what they made was sold by the other business, Bingham and Taylor.
So the Virginia business, the Bingham and Taylor business, that part of Virginia was selling almost everything that was made in Alabama.
Correct.
Yep.
And so they had been told over and over again, you're not making money, things aren't good, but yet the business persisted. So when we finally went down, made the decision, I will never forget the look in people's eyes of disbelief, disappointment, sadness. And but I stood there and looked in their eyes, and I realized how important that was, that I was there personally as the part owner and CEO of the business, that I hadn't delegated off that task. As opposed to when we went about it up here, we were able to, we really didn't have any layoffs. We were able to offer some early retirement packages, and we were able, for people who wanted to take unemployment and go for retraining with the state, they were able to do that. So we were able to do it by offering people ways of going on with their lives. In the other case, it was we did what we could to help people, but it's that shock, something I'll always remember.
Why do you think the shock was so much more? I mean, because it was a sort of a similar conversation.
Yeah.
I mean, right. What was it sort of, there was more, sounds like
because we were telling them that in 60 days you don't have a job. As opposed to telling people, hey, we're going to have to do some things, and here are some options for you. And what we didn't say was, if enough of you take this option, then the people who volunteer, we won't have to make anything involuntary. To me, I guess that's
a much better situation, actually.
I probably could have said that right at the beginning
and
cut out the last 5 minutes.
That's totally fine. So you decided to move. How hard was it to set up the manufacturing overseas to kind of keep the ability to
Not as hard as you would think. So we actually hired a consultant who went over and went and visit, 40 or 50 ball companies in China, and narrowed it down. So by the time we were going over, because we started with partners, we started with operating ball companies where we could go in, did not have ones that did not already have a North American presence. They were interested in branching out, and we really partnered with them and invested in their business, taught them quality, taught them, how to be a supplier to North America and in particular to the automotive industry. And so it was the company the people we originally started working with, we don't work with anymore. So it's ebbed and flowed, evolved over time to the point now where we have our own facility in China. We make other things, like we make the it's actually a retainer, but it's a long skinny thing, which is why I'm going like this with my hand, that goes in the seat slides for cars.
Got it.
And we assemble those in our factory. We clean some balls that are used for disk drive manufacturing. So a variety of things.
Branched out a little bit more there.
Yes.
And how hard was that relative to, say, upgrading the technology in the factory in Virginia that you also had to do?
Hard is a word I don't think about too much.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And please don't take this as a political comment, but in 2019, we were trying to decide which investment we needed to make first in the foundry. And it was a choice between going from a coal-fired furnace to electric melt, so using electricity to melt iron. And it was a choice between either making that transition or buying bigger and more efficient molding equipment. When the election occurred in 2020, or I guess it was the end of 2019, and going into 2020, I became concerned that we were going to face increasing regulations for air quality, that the coal mines were going to come under attack for environmental reasons. So this is not really a political statement. It was more about the fact that I knew the incoming administration had a very directed environmental agenda. And I've been proven right. The cost of coke, which is a byproduct of coal, has quadrupled since we made that decision. The standards for air quality that we're subjected to in operating, think about your barbecue grill with your coal, creates smoke, right? We have to capture and keep clean all of that smoke that comes out. So it was at that point I said that's what we're going to do. I also knew.
What decision did you make?
To do the electric melt, because I knew we had to get rid of. I knew we couldn't continue to operate the cupola. Now, if you think about the timing, that was 2020. Mm-hmm. We had been in that facility for magic number 80 years, just like before. They started in 1849, and by the 1940s, 100 years later, they had to make a decision. And so it was really a decision around, is a foundry important to our business or not? And if it is, we've got to upgrade what we have.
And so you did?
Yes.
And how did it work out?
It's worked out great. We've improved our environmental footprint. We've improved our safety for our workers. We have more capacity, and we are ready for what has started to come and will come, which is the spending on repair and replacing the water infrastructure across the United States, which is in a really bad condition.
It's been around for a long time. Back to your point before, you've got to upgrade if you want to survive. That includes core infrastructure as well.
Yes. And do you realize, if I may,
please,
that over a third of the water systems in the United States are over 80 years old?
I did not know that, but it makes sense.
And the estimate for the next third is between 40 and 80 years old. Hence, the problem. There's a water main break in the United States every 2 minutes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
That's a loss of water. This is not just... And you think about it. You gave me this lovely glass of water.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you took it out of a water bottle.
You did not.
Maybe you went to the tap and you turned it on and the water came out. You didn't think twice about it.
Not at all.
Not at all. But if we don't fix the crumbling water infrastructure in the United States, you will have more cities, and there are some today, where there is not potable water in their city, and they deliver pallets of bottled water to people's homes and neighborhoods.
Oh, well, that's a pretty stark warning right there.
I'm sorry. I know
that's all right. But that's why we got it.
We didn't talk about where we were going to go or where we'd end up.
but that's where we've ended up.
Okay.
So let's talk a little bit about from a business, going back to kind of a business standpoint and thinking about, the challenge that you must face in trying to manage two very different businesses. Now, understanding that they sort of come together in the sense that they both make things that are needed for everyday life and that people don't definitely know about. But at least from my perspective, there isn't a whole lot that's similar to, say, ball manufacturing and all stuff related to that, and what's going on in making the junction boxes and the management boxes for gas and water. So when you think about sort of running it from your perch, sort of as CEO, looking at both of these different businesses, how do you sort of figure out how to manage two disparate businesses and do so to give them both sort of quality and make sure that you're focused on making the investments they got to make and different go-to-market strategies? Like, how do you think about bringing that together?
Yeah, so I would say that there are a lot of similarities just in manufacturing as a discipline, right? Repair and maintenance of equipment, investment in equipment. There are, supply chain issues. There are commonalities. But I would say the biggest factor for me is my team and my people. And having people that know what they're doing and who, know what they're doing is probably the biggest one. And we get together as a senior leadership team periodically to talk about things and to help each other solve problems.
Do you have a large sort of what I'll call corporate team that's sort of not tied to each of the individual businesses, or really sort of small Virginia Industries team and really rely heavily on the management teams of each individual business?
So we've gone back and forth on this comment, on this point. I would say that for Hartford Technologies, we've had the same leader of that business for 18 years. For Bingham and Taylor, which has grown significantly, particularly over the last 3 or 4 years, we have more disciplines represented on the senior leadership team. So, for example, we'll have CFO or somebody overseeing IT. Those people are common across the business. But then we'll have, someone who runs the sales side of things, somebody running the operational side of things, and those people are very specific to Bingham and Taylor.
To the individual businesses.
Yes. Now I'm talking a little bit out of two sides of my mouth because today I'm running sales for Bingham and Taylor because I'm trying to hire someone to fill that role.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you got to step in. So
that's what happens. That's what happens when you're a CEO is if you don't have somebody to do it, you got to do it.
You got to step in and fill the gap. So something that we talked about kind of before the show that we haven't got to yet is sort of your thoughts around manufacturing and reshoring. And I know that's been a conversation that a lot of people have talked about. I'd be interested sort of your take on what are we doing vis-a-vis reshoring and how's it impacted your business?
I think there has to be a strong reason for reshoring. And what I had mentioned before we started is that there's 3 brass foundries being built in the United States. Now, we don't do brass, but that's because they see the need and requirement from the federal government. If they use federal funds for these water projects, they have to use parts that are poured. So the iron, the brass, whatever, it has to be poured in the United States. That's why you're seeing a stronger investment in that particular sector, because people know that the federal funds are going to get used and that there'll be opportunities for them. Mm-hmm. So I think there has to be a reason to bring it back. I think I showed this earlier, sort of outlining the processes that are involved in manufacturing balls, that balls will probably never come back to the United States. It's not a highly automated process. It's labor intensive. It's multiple processes, not to mention there's some not even represented by this cute little thing we like.
Little diagram you showed.
We use to show people kind of the basics of the process. So there's things that, in my opinion, will never come back. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of the things that are coming back for a reason. Electronics, right? We couldn't get sensors, or I'm not good on the terminology, but that went offshore. There's people trying to bring it back. Yep. So there has to be a reason for it. Just to say I'm going to bring it back it's going to be
It's
more.
got to make sense.
It's
If it
going to
makes
be
sense.
more expensive. So there has to be something beyond cost.
That's
The
driving.
reason that drives it.
So, but you guys have started to make a foray into bringing some functionality back.
We have. So we bought a company called Waterbury Swiss little less than 2 years ago, and because Hartford Technologies, really back in the 2000s when we went offshore with our ball making, we kind of decimated. That's a very strong word, but we reduced our manufacturing capabilities and our manufacturing know-how, I'll say. Now, you're probably sitting there and saying, well, wait a minute, she's got 3 factories in Virginia. Surely there are people that know how to make things there. And of course there are, but it's different. Making a ball, making a bearing is a very different thing than making a meter box or a valve box. And so we decided that we wanted to rebuild our North American presence because in part we were seeing opportunities come across through our digital marketing that we couldn't satisfy in China because the volumes were too low. Or maybe it was really a domestic requirement and we felt it could be done here. So we didn't have that capacity or that know-how. So we acquired this business to help us rebuild that. We also felt when we acquired it that because of our know-how with digital marketing that we could help build that business.
So a little bit of a going back to you need to have a reason.
Need to have
you
a
were seeing sort of
reason
inbound demand.
that
So just to take one step back before we go forward again. No, it's okay. When you say you sort of had lost some of that manufacturing skill, that's because after you moved the manufacturing overseas, what was left here was what, like R&D, or what were you guys doing?
So we have R&D, supply chain, quality control, engineering, all the things that would take you to the precipice of putting something out on the floor to make it.
And then the floor just happens to be somewhere else.
And the floor just happens to be somewhere else.
So the challenge now, of course, is if you want to make something, in order to make it effectively when the floor is somewhere else, you sort of need to have enough of a volume, enough of like a consistent state to make it worth it. Otherwise, the cost to sort of do low runs just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
Going back to the reason.
Correct.
So that sort of drove you to the idea of saying, hey, well, what if we bought something here that was local and we took the demand we can't meet in our current manufacturing and had a way to now meet it here?
Yes.
And how's that going?
It's going really well. I mean, the former owner is still there, which is really exciting to see. And I mean, because it doesn't always work out well when somebody sells their business and stays. So that business is celebrating its 75th anniversary. Started in 1949 by the Tremeglio family. So that's sort of exciting. And I think we've been helping that business improve their systems, and we've invested in some equipment to make it stronger.
What's your philosophy? Do you have a philosophy, Laura, of like how you think about running all these businesses? Because I'm sort of seeing a theme here.
Boy.
But yeah, I mean, when you think about like sort of making these decisions, going down these different journeys, how do you think about organizing all that and putting it all together? Like, is there a overriding philosophy or thought that you think about as you make all these decisions?
I would say 2 things. You have to invest. You have to be willing to put money back in the business. Otherwise, you're not going to have anything. The other thing I would say is I've become a big believer in getting out of my office and going and talking to people, whether it's visitors, visitors, that's the wrong word, customers, people working in our industry, employees, that all of those data points that I get from being out in the world, even coming here today and listening to you talk about this one or that one, I pick up something everywhere I go. And all of those things come together and help me make good decisions.
Damn, I totally agree with that. So that's great. That's great. So what's what's next? Seems like there's a really great growth path for what you have for Bingham and Taylor. You're making some really interesting investments in the Hartford Technologies business. Is it sort of more on that path? Like what do you see in the future? What are the next steps?
So we have some opportunities for Hartford Technologies that I can't quite talk about publicly yet, but I think they'll be very interesting. I would say that, for the Waterbury Company, which we've maintained their name for their customers, but they're also a capacity for Hartford Technologies. I think we're seeing more and more opportunities that we've been able to bring to help grow that business. I think that's what we're going to see. As far as Bingham and Taylor goes, while we've spent the better part of the last 4 or 5 years investing in equipment and in the physical plant, we've spent the last year or so investing in the front side. So more salespeople, more product development engineers, more geographic representation to try to, we've built the infrastructure, it's solid, it's sound, we can make a lot more than we're making today. Now, go get it.
Go get it. Yeah, we made the capacity. Now we got to fill it.
You got to fill it. Exactly.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I mean, look, and do you have hope that the challenges with the infrastructure that we talked about before will start to be fixed and addressed, and as part of that, what you guys make will get brought along?
Yeah, they are. I mean, there's been a fair amount of federal funds allocated to that. It's been slow going out. I would not place blame in any particular place other than to say that some of the rulemaking took time. So we're 100% domestic when it comes to that product line. So it doesn't affect us. But a meter has a sensor or a piece of electronic in it that's made offshore.
Well, it's that whole thing. If the product's 99% done, it can't go because it doesn't work.
Right. So they've had to work on some of that rulemaking, and that has kind of slowed it down because people don't want to launch into a project and find out that they have to dig it up.
Yeah, that's
not going to happen. No.
Yeah, that's not good.
So and there's been a fair amount of So I'll just say that it's definitely. There are definitely big projects that we're already engaged with in certain geographies, but there's just a lot more work to be done.
Future is bright.
That's what I look at, yeah. They estimate that it's going to cost over the next 20 years $1 trillion to repair and replace. This is an industry estimate to repair and replace the water system. And you know what I say? I only need to be a rounding error.
That's right. Yeah, you don't need much. You don't need much of $1 trillion.
I could just be a little.
Did you in 1999 when you made the announcement at 6 or 7 months pregnant? Did you foresee being here 25 years later?
No. And one of the things I have to say that some of the best things that have happened in my life. Some personal, some professional, have come because I went through a door because I was seeking item A, but I ended up in place B. And place B was way better than place A. But if I hadn't opened the door to this opportunity, whatever it was I thought I was doing, I never would have gotten to the other place. So probably the quintessential story about my whole life is if I hadn't accepted my father's job to do IT, I wouldn't be where I am today. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you.
Got to take those opportunities when they're right in front of you, Laura, not to think too much about it. I'm going to wrap up with a few last questions.
Of course.
Do you have a favorite business book?
I do not.
You do not. Do you have where do you spend time learning about? You talked about kind of going out in the world and talking to people. Are there other things that you do to try and polish up on sort of, I don't know, business know-how or, keep your skills sharp like that? So
I've been involved in what's called Vistage. Mm-hmm. It used to be called the Tech Group. And it's basically a group of CEOs. We get together for a full day once a month. And we have speakers every other meeting. And that in addition, well, let me just say, the speakers give you a lot of information. I always say to myself, if I can get one or two usable things out of what this person has said, then it's been a success for the day. It's also very useful to have a place to go where you can discuss things with your peers, with other business people. I'm not saying that that's the only place I go for education, but and I think that's why I don't have a favorite business book, because I find that I get one or two ideas and then I have to make them my own.
That's right. Well, listen, it's better to get one or two you can implement than a whole sheet which you never actually do anything with.
Exactly. Right? That's right.
Laura, what's something that you learned early in your life or early in your career that you think's helped propel you to all the success that you've had?
That's a very good question. I'm going to tell a short story, if I may.
Please.
I have been a woman operating in a man's world my entire career. And the industries that I'm involved in, the manufacturing that I'm involved in, is still today very male-dominated. And a friend of mine who runs a foundry said to me one day, I was complaining, it's like, these guys who work for me. Now, I do have a few women, but not as many as I'd like. And I said, this is not going well for me. And he said, Laura, there's one thing you have to understand about us guys. We're going to go and go and go until you tell us to stop. And I do wish I had known that earlier in my career, because women and men, and I have tried my entire career to not think about differences, rather think about similarities. But in this way, men are much more direct. They take criticism much more easily, and they're not going to stop until you tell them to. And I think, and I apologize to all the young women out there who may be listening to this, because I am a child of my era, and you can't escape that. You know, and I think I grew up in an era where if you were a young lady, you asked permission. You know, and it's just a very different way. And this friend of mine, have you ever heard of a Lodge frying pan?
No.
Sure. Okay. If you want a cast iron skillet, go to the store.
Okay.
And you'll see a lot. I'm
Lodge
giving a
frying pan.
shout out from my friend Henry Lodge,
Okay.
Who gave me this advice. And I saw him, I don't know, a week or two ago. And anyway, it was really valuable advice about the fact that, you know, appreciating, you know, I was so often a woman trying to fit into a guy's world and not notice that I was the only woman, right? Now I'm really focused on, okay, people are different, right? And I need to understand what that means to that and how they're going to receive the message that I'm giving them.
And how's that been working out for you?
It's better.
It's better.
It is better. Yeah. I try to keep these things in mind when I deal with people.
Is there, and so this is where actually you answered a little bit of both questions. Yeah. That's okay. So because the last question I was going to ask you here was, what's something that you've learned later on in your career that you'd go back and tell young Laura, and if she'd listened to you, it'd make a real big impact on her
That
life?
would have made it. That would have helped. That advice from Henry would have definitely helped me a little bit early. Although it was fairly early on. It was probably, I don't know how many years ago, but it was fairly early on. But it would have been helpful to know that earlier on.
And it stuck with you the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, it's and that's the funny thing about learning, I think, is that you don't always know when the learning is going to come through and benefit you. You don't always know, which is why you have to be open to learning, I think.
Amen. Every single time.
Every day.
I'm going to leave it right there.
Okay,
Laura,
fair enough.
Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. It's been really interesting.
Thank you, Ari. Appreciate your time today.
Made in America with Ari Santiago is brought to you by Compass MSP.
Thanks for listening and spending some time with me today. My goal is to help build a strong manufacturing community, and it would be impossible to do without all of you.